Good morning, football fans. Big Al here on this early Thursday morning. It's October 26, 2023, and welcome to the Week 7 edition of the week that was. And man, what a week this was. A lot of upsets, a lot of surprises this week. And with that, my picks suffered for it. All right, we're going to run you through all the statistical numbers from week 7 of the 2023 NFL season. And as I said, my picks did suffer this week. I'll tell you all about it at the end of the rundown. And it's also there you'll find my newly released week 8 power rankings. So strap in and join me for the week 7 edition of the week that was. And we're going to start, as always, with Thursday Night Football, where last week the Jacksonville Jaguars beat the New Orleans Saints 31-24. The Jags road trip continues on Sunday in Pittsburgh against Kenny Pickett and the Steelers. And the Saints also on the road next week in Indianapolis against the Colts. Jacksonville remains atop the AFC South at 5-2. While the Saints dropped to 3-4. All right, here are the offensive numbers from both teams. The Jaguars offense ran 56 plays for 330 yards, averaging 5.89 yards per play. 30 passes for 217, averaging 7.23 yards per pass, and 26 rushes for 113, averaging 4.35 yards per run. The Saints offense ran a whopping 86 plays for 407 yards, averaging just 4.73 yards per play. 55 passes for 295, averaging 5.36, and 31 rushes for 112, averaging 3.61. They finished with 18 first downs. They now have 140 through 7 games. They were not good on third down on Thursday night, 2 of 11 for 18.2%. On the season, they're at 32 of 94 for 34%. They went 1 for 2 on fourth down, and on the season, they're 4 for 10. Jacksonville committed 5 penalties for 42 yards and now have 33 on the season for 252. Time of possession was 23 minutes and 50 seconds. The Saints offense recorded 25 first downs. They now have 135 through 7. They weren't good on third down either. They were 3 for 18 for 16.7%. And for the year, they're 37 of 108 for 34.2%. They were an impressive 4 for 6 on fourth down, and on the season, they're 6 for 11. New Orleans committed only 3 penalties for 34 yards, and they have 46 total for 440. Time of possession is 36 minutes and 10 seconds. This puts the Saints in ball hawk territory. If you're new here, a ball hawk is a team that possesses the ball for at least 35 minutes in a game, win or lose. All right. Through 7 games, the Jaguars' offense is now averaging 336.3 yards per game, 222.8 yards passing, and 113.4 yards rushing. They've scored 173 points, averaging 24.7 points a game. The Saints' offense through 7 games is averaging 326 yards a game, 227.8 yards passing, and 98.1 yards rushing. They've scored 133 points, averaging 19 points per game. Defensively, the Jaguars had 50 tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 9 passes defense, 1 interception, and 1 touchdown. And for the season, 302 tackles, 13 sacks, 8 forced fumbles, 44 passes defense, 9 interceptions, and 2 touchdowns. Jacksonville's defense is allowing 354.4 yards per game, 273.8 passing, and 80.6 rushing. They've allowed 146 points, averaging 20.8 points per game. As for the Saints defense, they recorded 36 tackles, no sacks, 1 forced fumble, 5 passes defensed, no interceptions or touchdowns. And for the year, they have 251 tackles, 13 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 46 passes defensed, 8 interceptions, and 1 touchdown. The Saints defense is giving up 285.7 yards per game, 187 yards passing, and 98.7 yards rushing. They've allowed 127 points, which is 18.1 points per game. Point differential is plus 27 for the Jaguars and plus 6 for the Saints. Closing line was New Orleans minus 2.5. Over under was 41.5. The two teams combined for 55 points, 737 yards, and 142 plays, averaging 5.19 yards per play. I took the Saints both straight up and against the spread, and you can pretty much tell how that went. Now to the Sunday schedule, starting off with the Atlanta Falcons taking over sole possession of first place in the NFC South after a 16-13 victory over the Buccaneers in Tampa. The Falcons are off to Nashville this week to play the Titans, while the Bucs will host the Buffalo Bills on Thursday night. Atlanta, as I said, takes over sole possession of first place in the NFC South at 4-3, while Tampa Bay drops to 3-3. Checking the offenses in this game, the Falcons ran 63 plays for 401 yards, averaging 6.37 yards per play. 25 passes for 245, averaging 9.8 yards per pass, and 38 rushes for 156, averaging 4.11 yards per run. The Buccaneers offense ran 62 plays for 329, averaging 5.31 yards per play. 42 passes for 256, averaging 6.1 yards per pass. 20 rushes for 73 yards, averaging 3.65 yards per run. The Falcons had 20 first downs in the game. They now have 144 through their 7. They were 7 of 13 on third down, 53.8%. And on the year, they're 37 of 93 for 39.8%. No fourth downs offensively for the Falcons. They remain at 4 for 9. They committed 9 penalties for 60 yards and 39 through 7 games for 373. Time of possession was 29 minutes and 59 seconds. The Tampa Bay offense registered 21 first downs, bringing them to 102 through 6. They were 6 of 12 on third down for 50%, and on the season, 35 of 81 for 43.2%. They were 0 for 1 on fourth down, and on the season, 3 of 5. They also had 9 penalties for 66 yards, 39 total for 283. Time of possession is 30 minutes and 1 second. Falcons offense in 7 weeks is averaging 341 yards per game, 216.7 yards passing, and 124.3 yards rushing. Atlanta scored 115 points, averaging 16.4 points per game. The Bucs offense is averaging 297.7 yards a game through 6 games, 219.8 yards passing, and 77.8 yards rushing. They scored 103 points, averaging 17.2 points per game. On defense, the Falcons recorded 42 tackles, 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 8 passes defensed, 1 interception, and no touchdowns. For the year, they have 258 tackles, 13 sacks, 5 forced fumbles, 27 passes defensed, 4 interceptions, and no touchdowns. In 7 games, the Falcons' defense is averaging 285.4 yards per game allowed, 193 yards passing, and 95.3 yards rushing. The Falcons have allowed 133 points, averaging 19 points per game. Point differential for Atlanta is -18. The Buccaneers defense records 49 tackles, 1 sack, 2 forced fumbles, 3 passes defense, no interceptions or touchdowns. On the season, they have 270 tackles, 16 sacks, 7 forced fumbles, 23 passes defense, 6 interceptions, and 1 touchdown. Through 6 games, the Buccaneers are allowing 342.5 yards per game, 246.7 passing, and 95.8 rushing. They've allowed 104 points on the season, which is 17.3 points per game, and their point differential is -1. Closing line was Tampa Bay -3, over under was 37. The two teams combined to score 29 points, 730 yards, 125 plays, averaging 5.84 yards per play. I took the Bucs both straight up and against the spread. Up next, it's the New England Patriots upsetting the Buffalo Bills 29-25. New England plays another division rival as they'll venture into Miami to face Tua Tagovailoa and the Dolphins, while the Bills will play host to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Thursday Night Football. New England with the victory goes to 2-5, while Buffalo drops to 4-3. Looking at the offenses, the Patriots ran 54 plays for 364 yards, averaging 6.74 yards per play. 30 passes for 268, averaging 8.93 yards per pass, and 24 rushes for 96 yards, averaging an even 4 yards per run. The Bills' offense records 65 plays for 339 yards, averaging 5.21 yards per play. 41 passes for 258, averaging 6.29, and 24 rushes for 81, averaging 3.38. New England would finish the game with 21 first downs. They have 120 through 7. They went 4 for 9 on third down, 44.4%. On the season, they're 35 of 97 for 36.1%. No fourth down plays for this Patriots offense, so they stay at 2 for 10 on the season. The Patriots committed 8 penalties for 59 yards and 47 total through 7 games for 356. Time of possession is 27 minutes and 46 seconds. The Buffalo offense records 24 first downs. This puts them up to 156 through 7 games. They went 5 of 12 on third down, 41.7%. On the season, they're 42 of 87 for 48.3%. They went 2 for 3 on fourth down, and for the season, they're an impressive 5 for 8. Buffalo, meanwhile, had 9 penalties for 46 yards, so that's 17 total flags by the two teams. The Bills now have 46 penalties for 341. Time of possession is 32 minutes and 14 seconds. The Patriots offense through 7 games is averaging 294.3 yards per game, 200.9 yards passing, and 85.4 yards rushing. They've scored 101 points, averaging just 14.4 points per game. The Bills' offense in 7 games, averaging 369.7 yards per game, 256.9 yards passing, and 112.9 yards rushing. They've scored 198 points through the first 7 weeks, averaging 28.3 points per game. On defense, the Patriots records 45 tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 3 passes defense, 1 interception, and no touchdowns. For the season, they have 308 tackles, 13 sacks, 5 forced fumbles, 23 passes defense, 3 interceptions, and no touchdowns. New England's defense on average is allowing 311.3 yards per game through 7 weeks, 210.6 yards passing, and 100.7 yards rushing. They've allowed 177 points, averaging 25.3 points per game. And the Bills' defense on Sunday recorded 45 tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 2 passes defense, no interceptions, and no touchdowns. And through 7 games, they have 306 tackles, 24 sacks, 9 forced fumbles, 29 passes defense, 8 interceptions, and 1 touchdown. Buffalo's defense on average is giving up 329.6 yards per game, 201.2 passing, and 128.3 rushing. They've allowed 118 points, averaging 16.9 points per game. Point differential for the Patriots is minus 76. Point differential for the Bills is plus 80. Closing line was Buffalo minus 7.5. Over under was 41. The two teams combined for 54 points, 703 yards, and 119 plays, averaging 5.91 yards per play. I took the Buffalo Bills both straight up and against the spread. Moving on to the wildest game of Week 7 and moving on to the wildest game of Week 7 and perhaps the wildest game of 2023 to this point. And that's the Cleveland Browns getting a late touchdown, a very late touchdown, to knock off the Indianapolis Colts on the road 39-38. It gets no easier for the Browns, who will visit the Seahawks in Seattle this week, while the Colts will host the New Orleans Saints. Cleveland is now 4-2 on the season. Indianapolis drops to 3-4. Let's take a look at the offenses. Starting with the Browns, they ran 70 plays for 316 yards, averaging 4.51 yards per play. 37 passes for 166, averaging 4.49, and 33 rushes for 150, averaging 4.55. The Indy defense ran 63 plays for 456, averaging 7.24 yards per play. 23 passes for 288 yards, averaging 12.52 yards per pass. That's impressive. And 40 rushes for 168 yards, averaging 4.2 yards per run. Browns offense had 18 first downs, 113 through 6 games. They finished 4 of 16 on third down for 25%. On the year, they're 26 of 88 for 29.5%. Fourth downs, they finished 1 for 2. On the season now, they are 4 for 7. Cleveland committed 4 penalties for 20 yards. They have 42 through 6 games for 351. Time of possession is 27 minutes and 29 seconds. As for the Indianapolis Colts, they had 20 first downs in the game on Sunday, 134 through 7. They were 7 of 15 on third down for 46.7% and 40 of 101 on the year for 39.6%. Indy's offense did not have a fourth down play, so they remain at 5 for 14. The Colts had 8 penalties for 67 yards and 48 total for 356. Time of possession was 32 minutes and 31 seconds. Give me just a second. I got to write something in. All right. We got that out the way now. All right. The Browns offense in 6 games, averaging 319.2 yards a game, 171.7 yards passing, and 147.5 yards rushing. They've scored 134 points, averaging 22.3 points per game. The Colts offense is averaging 361.1 yards per game through 7 weeks, 237.1 yards passing, and 124 yards rushing. They've scored 178 points, averaging 25.4 points per game. Defensively, the Browns recorded 54 tackles, 4 sacks, 4 forced fumbles. That's right, 4 forced fumbles, 3 passes defensed, 1 interception, and a touchdown. For the season, the Browns have 232 tackles, 18 sacks, 6 forced fumbles, 23 passes defense, 3 interceptions, and their first defensive score of the season. They're allowing 243 yards per game through 6 games, 149.2 yards passing, 93.8 yards rushing. They've allowed 115 points, averaging 19.2 points per game. Point differential for the Browns is plus 19. And for the Colts, they recorded 46 tackles, 2 sacks, no forced fumbles, 7 passes defense, 2 interceptions, and no touchdowns. Through 7 games, they have 345 tackles, 20 sacks, 9 forced fumbles, 27 passes defense, 6 interceptions, and 1 touchdown. The Indy defense is giving up 351.3 yards per game, 232.6 yards passing, and 118.7 yards rushing. They've given up 191 points, averaging 27.3 points per game. Their point differential is minus 13. And the Browns, if I didn't mention, their point differential was plus 19. Closing line was Cleveland minus 3.5. Over under was 40. This was the highest scoring game of the week as the two teams combined for 77 points. 772 yards and 133 plays, averaging 5.8 yards per offensive play. I picked the Browns both straight up and against the spread, and as you can tell, I split those two. Moving on now to the Baltimore Ravens, who manhandled the Detroit Lions 38-6. The Ravens to battle the Arizona Cardinals, while the Detroit Lions will host Monday Night Football against the Las Vegas Raiders. Both teams are 5-2. Starting with the Ravens offense, 55 plays for 503 yards, averaging 9.15 yards per play. 28 passes for 357, averaging 12.75 yards per game. That's very good. And they had 27 rushes for 146 yards, averaging 5.41 yards per run. As for the Lions, they ran 67 plays for 337, averaging 5.03 yards a play. 53 passes for 253, averaging 4.77. Only 14 rushes for 84 yards. Only 14 rushes for 84 yards, but that's an average of 6 yards a run. The Ravens had 23 first downs and 142 through 7 games. They finished 4 of 8 on third down for 50%. In 2023, they are now 43 of 98 on third down for 43.9%. They went 1 for 1 on fourth down, and on the season, they are 2 for 5. Baltimore committed 4 penalties for 45 yards. They have 43 total for 412. Time of possession is 30 minutes, 22 seconds. The Lions offense limited to 18 first downs. They're up to 100 47 through their 7 weeks. They were 5 of 16 on third down, 31.3%. For the year, they are now 40 of 98 for 40.8%. They finished 2 of 6 on fourth down, and for the year, they are now 7 of 16. Detroit would commit 5 penalties for 57 yards, and on the season, they have 41 for 403. Time of possession is 29 minutes, 38 seconds. Ravens offense through 7 games, averaging 362.6 yards per game, 217.6 yards passing, and 145 yards rushing. They've scored 171 points, averaging 24.4 points per game. The Lions offense in 7 weeks is averaging 377 yards a game. $258.9 yards passing and 118.1 yards rushing. They've scored 174 points, averaging 24.9 points per game. Defensively, the Ravens record 51 tackles, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 6 passes defensed, 1 interception, and no touchdowns. For the year, they have 301 tackles, 27 sacks, which leads the NFL, 5 forced fumbles, 40 passes defensed, 6 interceptions, and no touchdowns on the defensive side. Their defense is giving up 271.7 yards per game, 176 yards passing, and 95.7 yards rushing. They've allowed 97 points through 7 games, averaging just 13.9 points per game. And their point differential through 7 weeks is plus 74. The Lions defense on Sunday records 35 tackles, no sacks, no forced fumbles, no passes defense, no interceptions, and no touchdowns. So defensively, this was not a good game for them. All right, so they now have 289 tackles, 15 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 32 passes defense, 6 interceptions, and 1 touchdown. Their defense is surrendering 316.9 yards per game, 240.6 yards passing, and 76.3 yards rushing, which puts them among the league leaders in run defense. All right, the Lions have allowed 151 points. That's 21.6 points per game, and their point differential is plus 23. Closing line was Baltimore -3, over under 43.5. The two teams combined for 44 points, finishing slightly above the 43.5 point total, with 840 yards and 122 plays, averaging 6.89 yards per offensive play. I took the Ravens both straight up and against the spread. Next up, you got the Chicago Bears surprisingly blowing out the Las Vegas Raiders at home 30-12. The Bears are next up on Sunday Night Football in Los Angeles against the Chargers, while the Raiders play Monday night in Detroit. The Bears go to 2-5, while Vegas drops to 3-4. All right, looking at the offenses, the Bears ran 67 plays for 323, averaging 4.82 yards per play. 29 passes for 150, averaging 5.17, and 38 rushes for 173, averaging 4.55. The Raiders offense ran 59 plays for 235, averaging only 3.48 yards per play. 45 passes for 196. That's a 4.36 average per pass. And they were held to 14 rushes and 39 yards, averaging 2.79 yards per run. Chicago finished with 23 first downs. They have 132 through 7. They finished 8 of 13 on third down for 61.5%. On the season, they're 40 of 92 for 43.5%. They went 0 for 1 on fourth down, and for the year, they are 4 for 10. The Bears record 9 penalties for 110 yards, and on the year, they have 45 for 386. Time of possession was 34 minutes and 6 seconds. As for Vegas, they had 20 first downs and 134 through 7 games. They were not good on third down at 2 for 9 for 22.2%, 28 of 80 on the season for 35%, which is also not good. They did go 2 for 2 on fourth down, and for the season, 8 out of 9. That's 88.9%, by the way. The Raiders only committed 2 penalties for 15 yards. And on the year, they have 40 for 352. Time of possession is 25 minutes and 54 seconds. Chicago's offense through 7 games, averaging 324.3 yards per game, and they've been playing very well as of late. 183 yards passing and 141.3 yards rushing. They've scored 158 points, averaging 22.6 points per game. The Raiders' offense is averaging 284.1 yards per game, 215.6 yards passing, and 68.6 yards rushing. They've scored only 112 points thus far, which is 16 points per game. Defensively, the Bears record 36 tackles, 1 sack, no forced fumbles, 9 passes defense, 3 interceptions, and 1 touchdown. On the season, the Chicago defense has 285 tackles, 10 sacks, 6 forced fumbles, 27 passes defense, 6 interceptions, and a defensive touchdown. They're allowing an average of 339.4 yards per game, 257.1 passing, 82.3 rushing. They've allowed 188 points, averaging 26.9 points per game. Point differential for the Chicago Bears is minus 30. Raiders defense through 7 games, or rather the Raiders defense on Sunday records 43 tackles, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 3 passes defense with no interceptions or touchdowns. On the season, they have 293 tackles, 15 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 22 passes defense, 6 interceptions, and no touchdowns. Their defense through 7 games is allowing 316.4 yards per game, 187.4 yards passing, and 129 yards rushing. They've given up 161 points through 7 weeks, averaging 23 points a game, and their point differential is minus 49. Closing line is Las Vegas minus 2.5. Over-under is 38.5. The two teams combined for 42 points, 558 yards, and 126 plays, averaging 4.43 yards per play. I picked Vegas straight up and against the spread. If you're joining me late, you're watching the week that was as I run through all the statistical numbers from week 7 in the NFL. And coming up at the end, my picks records, both straight up and against the spread. And as I said in the beginning, my picks suffered, plus my week 8 power rankings. So make sure you stay tuned. Moving on now to the New York Football Giants. With Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, they beat the Washington Commanders 14-7. Meanwhile, the Giants will play in the Battle of New York as the Jets pay a visit to MetLife. Well, technically, they both play in the same stadium. The Giants are designated the home team. The Commanders will get their second crown in D.C. The Giants are now 2-5, while Washington is 3-4. Checking the offenses, 61 plays ran by the Giants for 356, averaging 5.83 yards per play, 29 passes for 250, averaging 8.62, 32 rushes for 106, averaging 3.31. The Commanders ran 61 plays for 273 yards, averaging 4.48 yards per play, 42 passes for 197, averaging 4.69, and they were limited to 19 rushes and 76 yards, averaging an even 4 yards per run. The Giants finished with 16 first downs. They have 118 through 7. They were 5 of 16 on third down for 31.3%. On the season, 41 of 108 for 38%. No fourth down plays by this Giants offense. They stay at 8 of 14 for the season. New York committed 4 penalties for 40 yards, 46 total for 377. Time of possession is 28 minutes, 46 seconds. The Commanders offense records 14 first downs. They have 138 through 7 games. And they were downright horrible on third down. 1 of 15, 6.7%. Yeah, that's bad. And their season numbers suffered for it. 25 of 85 for 29.4%. They did go 2 of 3 on fourth down, which makes them 6 of 9 on the season. Washington would commit 10 penalties for 75 yards. They now have 42 for 316. Time of possession, 31 minutes, 14 seconds. Giants offense in 7 games, averaging 278.4 yards per game, 178.6 passing, 99.9 rushing. They've scored 85 points, the fewest in the NFL. That's an average of 12.1 points per game. As for the Commanders, they're averaging 297.9 yards per game, 211.7 passing, and 86.1 rushing. They've scored 140 points, which is 20 points per game. On defense, the Giants record 39 tackles, 6 sacks, no forced fumbles, 6 passes defensed, 1 interception, and no touchdowns. For the year, the Giants defense has 272 tackles, 11 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 29 passes defense, 4 interceptions, and 1 touchdown. Now, the New York Giants entered Week 7 with the fewest sacks of any team in the NFL, 5 through the first 6 games. They record 6 sacks on Sunday. All right. So the Giants defense through 7 weeks, allowing 351.4 yards per game, 214.1 yards passing, and 137.3 yards rushing. They've given up 174 points, averaging 24.8 points per game. Point differential is minus 89 for the New York Giants. As for the Commanders, on Sunday they record 41 tackles, 4 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 5 passes defense, no interceptions, no touchdowns. On the season, they now have 304 tackles, 23 sacks, 6 forced fumbles, 37 passes defense, 5 interceptions, and no TDs. Their defense through 7 weeks is allowing 368.4 yards per game, 248.4 yards passing, and 125.7 yards rushing. All right, they were giving up 190 points thus far. That's 27.1 points per game. Washington's point differential was minus 50. Closing line is Washington minus 3, over-under 37. The two teams combined for only 21 points, 629 yards, and 122 plays, averaging 5.16 yards per play. I picked the Giants both straight up and with the points ATS. Now to the late game, starting off with the Seattle Seahawks defeating the Arizona Cardinals 20-10. Seahawks have a test at home next week against the Cleveland Browns, one of the top defenses in football. The Arizona Cardinals also have a test with Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens visiting State Farm Stadium this week. Seattle is now 4-2, and could they gain ground in the NFC West on the 49ers? Find out at the end of this rundown when we look at the Niners game with the Vikings. But Seattle is now 4-2. Arizona sits at the bottom of the NFC West at 1-6. Looking at the offenses, the Seahawks ran 56 plays for 318 yards, averaging 5.68 yards per play. 24 passes for 203, averaging 8.46, and 32 rushes for 115, averaging 3.39. The Cardinals offense ran 59 plays for only 249 yards, averaging 4.22 yards per play. 34 passes for 122, averaging 3.59. And they continue to run the ball pretty well. They ran 25 times for 127 yards, averaging 5.08 yards per run. The Seahawks offense had 18 first downs. They've got 123 through 6 games. Finished 7 of 13 on third down for 53.8%. On the season, 25 of 70 for 35.7%. No fourth down plays for the Seahawks offense. They remain at 3 for 7 in 2023. Seattle commits 5 penalties for 32 yards, 44 total for 387. Time of possession is 30 minutes and 32 seconds. Cardinals offense had 15 first downs. They've got 130 through 7 games. 5 of 15 on third down for 33.3%. 36 of 91 so far this year at 39.6%. Fourth down's not good. They're 0 of 3 on Sunday and 4 of 14 for the year. Arizona commits 7 penalties for 60 yards and 48 through 7 games for 415. Time of possession was written down as 29 minutes and 7 seconds, but it's really 29 minutes and 28 seconds. Seahawks offense through 6 games, averaging 329.7 yards per game, 223.7 yards passing, and 106 yards rushing. They've scored 144 points, averaging an even 24 points per game. Cardinals offense through 7 games, allowing or putting up 319.9 yards per game, 180.9 yards passing, and 139 yards rushing. So again, they continue to run the ball pretty well, even with James Conner out. Arizona scored 127 points in their first 7, averaging 18.1 points per game. On defense, the Seahawks records 49 tackles, 4 sacks, no forced fumbles, 8 passes defense, no interceptions, and no touchdowns. For the season, they have 284 tackles, 23 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 30 passes defense, 4 interceptions, and 2 scores on defense. They're allowing 322.2 yards per game through 6, 235 yards passing, and 87.2 yards rushing. The Hawks have allowed 118 points. That's 19.7 points per game. Their point margin is plus 26. The Cardinals record 43 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 3 passes defense, 1 interception, and no touchdowns. For the season, Arizona's D has 3 yards per game. 237.6. Closing line was Seattle -9, over